Good morning, Excellencies, and welcome to the Cape Town Conversation. It's a great pleasure to be here with this very distinguished gathering. Welcome, Minister Naledi Pandor, for being here, and to the Ministry of International Cooperation for shepherding us along and creating this event. President Mbeki for partnering with us with the foundation. Excellencies, distinguished guests, all of you present here. Welcome to this Cape Town Conversation, at a time which is turning out to be a seminal moment. We did not plan it that way, actually. But we do find ourselves in the most contrarian of times. It's a defining moment in many ways, and it is in the fitness of things that these conversations start this year in Cape Town. Come to think of it, in what should have been a truly globalized world, the rise of multiple poles with the emergence of several middle powers as its pillars should have strengthened multilateralism. But if the reverse has happened, it is primarily because the existing system was birthed at the time it was birthed with a deep genetic disorder which has become its fatal flaw. And that is primarily the inviolable privilege of unilateralism granted to the Permanent Five. The structure of the Security Council was such that it was designed for unilateralism. And so here we are in a world where the geopolitical rivalries, the trade ambitions, and the mutual insecurities of the Permanent Five hold the world hostage. The 21st century now does not come with hope, but it actually comes with the daunting challenge of surviving in a world where multilateralism lies fatally wounded in wars that no Geneva Convention controls. And caught in their mutual insecurities, there are not just the middle powers, there are the whole host of beleaguered emerging economies battling deprivation that, given a choice, have no interest in engaging in geopolitical competition. They have little interest in playing ball either with the unilateralists or the revisionists who want to overturn the global order. And that is where the divide between the East and the West, between geopolitics and geoeconomics, have intersected to create a third, far more dangerous divide. And that is the divide which has become a common subject of parlance today, something we'd forgotten, which is the North-South divide. How does an insecure North, facing deep socioeconomic fissures within their own borders, respond, and how much of globalization does it further undo through non-consultative, punitive, and unilateral action is the bigger cause for the Global South, the bigger cause for worry. Remember, for a short 2 decades after 1988, we all became, Cinderellas, living in a fairy tale world, merely riding this glitzy coach, which was conjured up by a magic chant of free markets and free trade, until 2008, midnight, when disaster struck. And this whole fairy tale coach turned out to be a pumpkin coach, which seemed to have been created only to profit off the comparative advantages of geographies, which were drawn together, created by sudden advancements in information technology. And when that reality struck, soon enough, within another 5-10 years, the same institutions that have spent the last few decades convincing a very skeptical Global South about the merits of free markets and open trade through the MDBs, went now to selling de-risking, reorienting global chains, border controls, and market intervention as the new normal. But sadly, it has not ended just there. In a world now connected irretrievably by technology, connectivity itself has been turned into a weapon of siege, and a medieval siege at that. Used to strangle communication, choke off financial flows, weaponize everything, cut off the lifelines of food, energy, water, medicine through completely non-consultative unilateral action, leaving victims with no recourse. And therefore, the fissure between the North and the South, the rich and the poor, has today become a discursive divide. It's a divide of ideas, it's a divide of values, it's a divide of narratives, in which the erstwhile rule makers and the former rule takers are no longer speaking to each other in the same language. A hyper-connected world faces a complete breakdown of communication. So, multipolar world suffering a severe bipolar disorder, of which we, last month, seem to have entered the manic phase. The problem is, a multipolar landscape navigated through bipolar lenses does not forebode well for global stability. A multipolar world needs a multipolar outlook. It implies seeing the world not in terms of black and white, not in terms of us and them, not in terms of those with us and those against us, but in terms of finding that middle ground, that progressive middle path that can take all forward. So what then will be the institutions, the groupings to help navigate these stormy waters to a multilateral arrangement that better reflects this multipolar reality? Now, certainly not a G7, which more and more resembles an echo chamber within which the words consensus and agreement no longer have any meaning. The 21st century is not about new security contests in new geographies such as the Indo-Pacific. Those geographies are important, but for different reasons that have little to do with either their use for containment or conflict. Our oceans don't need to be weaponized, but redefined. And the first redefinition is about the Asian Connect and the Indo-Asian Connect across the Pacific and the Atlantic. The second and more significant one is about recognizing the true geography of the Atlantic. No, the Atlantic is not and never was meant to be the pond between Brussels and Washington, D.C. It is a living, vibrant, very diverse ocean. And this redefinition, the whole ocean straddling Africa and the vastness of the Americas, that redefinition is about the growing importance of the region's collective voice in global governance. It's about countries looking for a truer, more balanced, discursive reality that includes African and Latin American voices in the MDBs and organizations dominated so far by the pond mentality. This is precisely where organizations such as the G20 and the BRICS step in. And inevitably, the need for a revamped G21 that expanded the G20 into the African Union was the call of the time. It had to happen. And we are happy that the change came during the Indian presidency. Simultaneously, BRICS, born as an acronym dreamed up by a clutch of investment bankers, would have faltered until last August. It drew in a whole slew of new members. And whatever the demerits of these groupings, and there are demerits to every grouping, there are differences, there will be differences between members, but you can be sure that with the kind of grouping that exists in these organizations, it certainly is not going to be, neither of these are going to be echo chambers. The revamped G20 and the BRICS represent a multicolored, multicultured grouping, which for all their differences and all their problems, have one singular advantage: the advantage of not seeing the world in terms of black and white. We know the world cannot be understood in terms of black and white, neither can it be understood in shades of gray. We live in a diverse, multicolored world that can only be comprehended in all its diversity. And this is a multipolar world that will function on the basis of plurilateralism. So, colorful world where diverse cultural beliefs spring subtle variations in legal and political systems, shape different economic and development paths, and jointly give meaning to far more subtle and varied perspectives on a beautiful, wide open world that knows the importance of building bridges and connecting across our differences. And therefore, here in Cape Town, it gives me the greatest pleasure and honor to present Her Excellency Minister Naledi Pandor, one of the most progressive voices from the Global South, which has challenged the tide of rising nationalisms and emphasized the need to revive international solidarity as a pillar for a new internationalism. A return to new internationalism, not the market-led globalization that turns out to have been a one-night stand in a cold, distant global village called Davos. And as the G20 changes hands, we pass on the T20 now to Brazil. And then we have South Africa. The dominance of the Global South in the G20 presidencies is the golden moment where we can make a difference to how this world is going to be governed. And for those ideas and many more, Madam, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank Dr. Joshi for that very kind introduction. I don't think I deserve all these lovely accolades. I always feel quite sorry for ministers in government because you're invited or appointed to these various positions. I suppose the presidents, I don't know President Mbeki, I suppose the presidents believe you have some talent for the particular area, and you may not. And so, you know, you've got to sort of have a go at it and hope that you're making some sense. So I've got this contribution I hope to make today, and I've been writing over my notes, and so if I falter for a moment, just remember I'm a minister who found myself here. So allow me to begin. Your Excellencies, former President Thabo Mbeki and former President Johnson Sirleaf, Excellencies, Ambassadors and High Commissioners, senior officials, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen and members of the media. I'm really honored to have the opportunity to address this esteemed gathering of the beginning of the Cape Town conversations. I wish to thank in particular His Excellency President Mbeki, as well as the Thabo Mbeki Foundation and all partners for organizing and hosting such an important event and for providing me with this opportunity to discuss topics of paramount importance. As a Cape Townian, I also wish to warmly welcome you all to our beautiful city of Cape Town, and I hope that our infamous southeaster wind does not get in the way of you enjoying a bit of our mother city in your free time. I hope in the course of the conference, you won't behave as one of my former colleagues did when I was Minister in Education. I hosted a Commonwealth Ministers' Education Conference in this very setting. And we were moving to a plenary session, and I met my colleague minister in the lift in beach sandals and shorts. And I said, surely you're not coming to our plenary dressed in that way. And he said to me, I'm heading to the beach. So I hope you don't do that in the course of this conference. So given the complexity and fluidity of the geopolitical landscape, platforms such as this one today are vitally important. Global leaders, academics, activists, policymakers have to converge, to pause, to analyze and robustly debate the current and future challenges that are facing us at this critical moment. They must also construct solutions in order that we, as Africans, can contribute to building a better Africa and a better world. Some of you might recall that in 1991, the acronym VUCA was coined, which stood for volatile, unpredictable, uncertain, and ambiguous in reference to the world at that time. It was used to describe the post-Cold War political, economic, and security architecture. Our situation today in the geopolitical domain is not too dissimilar, if not more dangerous than then. In fact, the South African international relations scholar, Professor Chris Landsberg, says that this acronym, VUCA, now seems passé as the world faces an even more unpredictable and fluid post-Cold War disorder with the hallmarks of the making of an anarchic second Cold War. He says further that the VUCA world appears to be changing toward even more problematic, distressing, unpredictable, and fluid features. He describes this geopolitical era as a UTAC disorder, which he says means uncharted, turbulent, anarchic, combustible. I agree with this analysis, as I believe we do live in a geopolitical landscape that has become increasingly complex, challenging, conflict-driven, and in a constant state of flux, with what some have called tectonic shifts in historic alliances, many of which are no longer based on ideology, on common values, nor common principles. You all are aware of these complexities. They include, among others, an increasing rise in unipolarity, in unilateralism, autocracy, conservatism, right-wing populism, racism, sexism, and all the isms you're aware of, narrow nationalism, greater adherence to tribalism and ethnicity, religious intolerance, violent extremism and terrorism, and for some, food, water, and energy insecurity. Accompanying all this, we have a rise in poverty, inequality, unemployment, and growing numbers of regional, continental, and global tensions and conflicts. These disruptions have worrying impacts on our continent and on our African aspiration for fundamental change in our world. In our continent today, there are approximately 20 conflicts underway. We have a recent resurgence in coups, particularly in our West African region, and we also see a worrying decline in democratic practices and in institution formation for the public good. We are concerned as well that the global crises that we see, the tensions, particularly in the developed North, shift attention away from Africa and from the rest of the developing world, thus resulting in even further neglect to our interests and causes. So it is within this challenging and crisis-ridden context that our continent needs to not only manage and adequately address its challenges, but to also identify and carefully navigate the opportunities evident if we want to become a continental catalyst for global change. One of the things I believe we need to do is that our regional economic organizations such as SADC, East African Community, ECOWAS, and others, as well as our African Union Commission, need to grasp the moment and strengthen their capabilities to advance our African Agenda 2063. I think in the first decade of this century, Africa began to show signs of positive capacity and a thirst for real change. The creation of the African Union, the resurgence of Pan-Africanism ideals, the formulation of the NEPAD development agenda, as well as the development of Agenda 2063 and other frameworks of development suggested the Renaissance was really taking off. However, we didn't use the moment effectively. I believe Africa can still be a key player in global affairs, but we need to attend to those matters that will practically help us to achieve this characterization. Our continent is a wonderful continent. It has immense cultural, historical, ethnic, religious, and geographical diversity. We are home to 54 countries, each very unique in their makeup. If this diversity were managed effectively, it would be a source of strength and unity, fostering and supporting innovation and creativity. Unfortunately, we are not managing to address the opportunity offered by our diversity. As we navigate an increasingly interconnected world, our ability to draw upon a wide array of perspectives, of ideas, and practices is crucial for addressing the complex socio-political and economic challenges we face as a continent. I think we need to learn to use our diversity much more effectively for socio-economic development and innovation. We need leaders who understand the strength of diversity. Our continent has approximately 1.4 billion citizens within it, the majority of whom are youth, and more than 70% of these young people are under the age of 30. Juxtapose this with the countries of the North, many of which are facing a rapidly aging population. How should we unify to use our strengths to support each other? We have a youth bunch, energetic, restless. It's a demographic dividend. It presents both opportunities and responsibilities. It offers our continent the opportunity for positive political and economic growth, but only if we fully empower this advantage to realize their full potential. We need to ensure that we do more to include young people in decision-making in all sectors and give them the appropriate skills, training, and opportunities, as well as use their innovation capability to ensure that we work on building inclusive growth. If we do not address this dividend effectively, our positive features will become a threat to the progress of our nations. We must ensure that this youthful energy doesn't translate into reckless energy. We're also a continent endowed with vast natural resources, rich agricultural land, vast seas and rivers, and an abundance of natural minerals. We have sufficient commodities, land, and ocean to address all our food, water, and energy security challenges, not just for Africa, but for the world. We thus possess the potential to become an economic powerhouse. But what we are failing at is harnessing these resources sustainably and equitably for the prosperity of the continent, but also for global economic peace, security, stability, and development. Of course, any success in Africa would always be linked with the global economy, given the attributes of the continent, and we have to ensure that we use our attributes to contribute to a more balanced and resilient world. Of course, I am often troubled because we act in a manner that suggests we are unaware of our advantages and the power that they give us, and thus we do not use these attributes to positive effect for the African continent. I suppose part of the problem is that leadership is vital to effective utilization of opportunity. We're also a continent that has amazing resilience. Many of our nations have overcome historical challenges, from colonization to neocolonialism, post-colonial conflicts, and other ills. We've learned many lessons from these experiences, and we should use them to guide the global community as we confront shared threats, such as the many regional and global wars between countries in the North and countries of the South. I had occasion recently to engage with my colleague from Iran, and we had an interesting conversation, which unfortunately had to be in front of the media. He was making a number of statements about the conflict in Palestine. And I pointed out to him that South Africa decided from the inception of its democracy that it would seek peace and justice, and that it would encourage nations to resolve problems by negotiation and to seek to settle all disputes through engagement. My colleague was a bit surprised that I wasn't advocating for armed conflict. But I was indicating to him that if you advocate for armed conflict, it is a loss of many of your people that you suffer. And I told him, in South Africa, we were very fortunate to have leaders who decided, in the context of the terrible experience of apartheid, that what we should seek is to put the people first and to negotiate a settlement that would introduce freedoms and the beginnings of justice. We haven't fully achieved all that we wish, but we're not killing each other in the streets as we might have done. So I think as the African continent, one of the things we need to perhaps teach the world is how we address common threats. I think there are a number of tasks for Africa that emerge from the world as we see it today. First, given comments about our demographic dividend, I believe it is critical to invest in education, in healthcare, and broad skills development for all our people, and particularly to ensure, as we educate them, that we are responsive to the new opportunities offered by this increasingly artificially intelligent world. So we must educate for the fourth and fifth industrial revolution and not educate on the traditional curricula of the past. A new world is upon us, and young people and our citizens in their entirety must be able to grapple with that new world. We must also ensure that we give greater education to future leaders so that we empower them to use the attributes of Africa to good effect in the interests of the people of Africa. Secondly, I believe that as Africans, we need to insist on meaningful partnerships with the world. In recent years, we have witnessed a growing recognition of Africa's potential, and we have seen the creation of new partnerships. The international community is increasingly engaging with African nations to foster collaboration in areas such as trade, technology transfer, regional infrastructure development projects, and sustainable development initiatives. This shift is indicative of a broader acknowledgement that Africa's success is intertwined with the success of the rest of the world. But what these partnerships have not done, they've not yet resulted in increased industrial capacity in Africa, in wider access to energy, in access to smart manufacturing. We have to insist that the partnerships we form give rise to these, because this is what will make Africa free. Without these elements, our partnerships are partnerships of supplication and not partnerships of true development. I think it's imperative for us to recognize and harness the opportunities emerging from the economic and social progress that is beginning to unfold across the continent. It does suggest a transformative era may be upon us. It does present unparalleled chances for collaboration and healthy competition among ourselves and between ourselves and the developed world. We need, as Africa, to develop new terms for our relationships and to ensure we achieve objectives that radically alter our condition. Our global relations, for me, still have the character of supplicant and, in the North, provider. We have to change this dynamic. We have this odd practice on the African continent that I've often complained about, where our presidents are invited to meetings with individual countries to discuss development opportunities. And you have a single country inviting 54 presidents of 54 countries, almost as though all 54 are the same and you can discuss the same development issues with all of them, when these are vastly different countries. And I've been arguing for a long time that our presidents need to stop going to those meetings and to have stronger bilateral relations with all these countries. Well, while I acknowledge this pivotal moment, let me also admit that I believe we find ourselves as Africa at a critical juncture where we do have an opportunity to shape the global narrative. I think this now lies no longer with the North, but with the countries of the South, and in particular with the rising stars of the African continent, of East Asia, and Asia. And we need to use this opportunity effectively. Given the natural resources I referred to earlier, particularly minerals required for future for our economies, we need to address how do we allow access to these rare minerals. One of my colleagues in one of the richer countries of the North said to me a few weeks ago, I've been having very positive discussions with Zambia about accessing cobalt resources. So I said, oh, that's good. I'm glad you're discussing with Zambia. but did you discuss the factory in Zambia which will beneficiate those resources? And he looked at me and said, that's a thought. So I said, I'm going to tell the Zambians not to agree to anything until you've discussed the factory. It's important that we ensure that our minerals benefit us and are not continuing to be transported out to be value added outside Africa, and we buy back at much higher cost than what we sold the minerals for. So the test for us as the African continent is, what is our ability to harness and harmonize this momentum and to channel it into meaningful avenues of cooperation and healthy contestation? This will determine our future relations with the world. So the challenge for Africa today is to successfully navigate the intricate and diverse tapestries of an ever-evolving geopolitical and geoeconomic landscape. African nations are potential poles of inclusive economic growth and can teach new lessons about economic success and how it is utilized. Can, depending on what they do, teach new lessons about how to achieve sustainable development. All of this offers a distinctive prospect of collaboration, functional coherence, and partnership. So we may be at a point where transformation is for the first time possible, where technological progress is a likelihood, but all of this needs dedicated collective attention, intellectual contribution, commitment, and full utilization of strategic foresight. We have to ensure that our relationships with the North are relations of functional cooperation. We have to transcend traditional boundaries, even as African countries, and forge innovative partnerships that are rooted in mutual respect and shared prosperity. I've believed for some time that Africa needs its own Africa 8, Africa 20, Africa BRICS, and that if we could have such formations, we can on our own unlock the vast potential that lies within our continent and create a ripple effect that would resonate globally. We've got to, of course, as we imagine these possibilities, confront our historical and current challenges as Africa and anticipate new challenges that might face us. We cannot fail to be more certain of what the difficult terrain might be if we wish to achieve the radical change I am referring to. If we are to take up leadership as a catalyst for global political and economic change, we need to address our many challenges. I believe that at present, Africa is one of the few continents with the moral authority to insist on a set of new values to drive international practice. One of the main challenges that I think still face us is that of lack of sufficient economic growth to address the needs of all our society. And the fact that our economies are still largely commodity-based is a real challenge for us. As I said, we are still exporting raw minerals. They are value added in the North. Our manufacturing sector is very low on the continent. Intercontinental trade is at a real low, at approximately 17% of our trade. We have seen it increase over the past 2 decades, but 17% is not good enough. There are many reasons for these low intra-African trade statistics: a lack of local manufacturing and beneficiation, capacity, drawing value and relying only on commodity-based economies. We are still reliant on extractive commodities and have not really shifted from the colonial infrastructure legacy. Our infrastructure is poor, our road and air capacity is inadequate, and all roads lead to the north rather than elsewhere. We need, therefore, to ensure that we change the order of trade. We have to ensure that we address the colonial legacies that still drive much of the economic practice on our continent. But I have to acknowledge that the continent has recognized these negatives, and we have begun to address some of the changes that we need to attend to. One of the areas in which I believe we've begun to become more serious is that of addressing the economic integration of Africa. We've done this through a bottom-up approach of developing regional economic development organizations, such as our SADC, ECOWAS, the East African Community, and of course we've recently adopted and begun to implement the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. We must ensure the speedy implementation of the AFCFTA in all its aspects, from harmonizing African legislation to ensure that there's free flow of goods, of services, and people throughout the continent. We must ensure we have sufficient regional infrastructure to ensure effective rail, road, air, and sea transport for goods to move easily. And of course, we must ensure that we build partnerships that allow us to leverage the strengths of both developed and developing economies. Thus, we must share knowledge, expertise, and resources to create synergies to accelerate inclusive growth and sustainable development. So as Africa, we must extend beyond rhetoric to tangible strategies that promote inclusive growth and sustainable development. We must commit to leveraging our collective strengths. Sometimes it's quite soul-destroying to see Africans compete among themselves, when unified action would lead to real success. So we need to understand our collective strengths and use them effectively. We need to embrace diversity. We need to harness the power of technology to bridge any gaps and to address disparities. We have to invest in the sectors I referred to earlier. I think if we have a skilled workforce, a healthy population, robust systems, we will begin to build a thriving Africa. We have to achieve investment in technology modernization. We have to invest in research, science, and innovation, and ensure we unlock new opportunities and drive economic diversification. Let me conclude by saying, I don't believe we can overstate the importance of Africa as a continent for catalyzing change. Its diversity, its resources, its resilience, and its young people position Africa as a key player in shaping the future of our global community. We must embrace the opportunities Africa presents, and together, North and South, we must work together to address the challenges we face, but also challenges addressed that will contribute to a more just, sustainable, fair, and prosperous world for all. I think that we should seize this opportunity more effectively to build a future in which collaboration will know no boundaries and where the progress of one will be seen as contributing to the advancement of all. Let us seize today to catalyze change and redefine Africa's role on the global stage. If we address our challenges head on, we can, as Africa, contribute to a world in which Africa will stand not just as a symbol of resilience, but as a fundamental catalyst for a brighter and more inclusive future for all our world, united in its diversity. Of course, this is a crazy aspiration given the moment, but as South Africans, we never fail to dream. I thank you very much for this opportunity.